Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I am your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Thursday, January 9th. It is semifinal day around here. We got Penn State and Notre Dame tonight, and we'll do a couple of wrap-up things. Today, on today's show, we'll first get into why each team can win a national title. We've talked about roadblocks. We've talked about keys to win this weekend. We got to talk about the big picture. Why would they have won if we look back in a couple of weeks and say, why did Penn State win? Why did Notre Dame win? Why did Texas or Ohio State win? I'll give you those answers here in a second. Then we'll get to the fallout of the wins and losses this upcoming weekend. Notre Dame feels like they've kind of sitting pretty. I don't think there's a huge drop-off one way or the other. Ohio State probably the other part of that. Definitely going to be a drop-off if they lose. If they win, no one's going to react until you win the next one. And then we'll get to a little question about that national title game. Should it be at the Rose Bowl permanently? Definitely a question that's been going around the college football world. Some pros, some cons, and we'll get into that and why it's kind of unfeasible, if I'm being totally honest. Then we'll get to a little bit of early NFL draft look. There's a lot of guys that are kind of finding their way into the NFL draft the last couple of days, and definitely want to make sure you guys know where everything stands. Top quarterbacks, top defenders, other players to watch, that type of thing. And then we'll finish it off, do a little final look at the semifinal games. Just cannot get enough of these two matchups, so want to make sure you guys are ready for all the matchups you're going to be watching tonight, some injury stuff, and then just a little bit of hype as we head into these games tonight. Going to be a ton of fun, and cannot wait for those to kick off, especially this one tonight. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all, we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have fun back and forth here, is to use that super chat at the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network page. You can click that $sign, add any question, comment you like. It'll pop up on the screen, and we can have fun back and forth here. Definitely want this to be as interactive as possible, so utilize that, and we can have fun back and forth throughout this show. But let's go ahead and jump in here, and let's just talk about why each team can win a national title. We've talked about, different roadblocks that could get in their way. We've talked about some keys to victory for them to possibly get past this round and to the national title. What would be the reason that they would win a national title if we were to look back on these seasons in a couple of weeks here? If Penn State were to win it, why would they have won it? Notre Dame, Texas, and Georgia, why would they have won the national title if they look back in a couple of weeks and they have won the national title? So I think there's a lot of different debates here, and I think there's a lot of different ways to look at it. And I think when you look at all of these teams, there's so many different things to love about these teams. There's no doubt about that. All of these teams have great things about them. All of these teams have different things that are really carrying them throughout this season. But we'll start with Penn State here, and I think this is the biggest one of the bunch. This two-headed monster is going to be an absolute nightmare for people to deal with, and that's the reality of the last couple of games. Is Kaytron Allen has gone for 124, 70 yards, and then 134 in their last three games. He's got 3 touchdowns in those games. Then Nick Singleton has gone for 105, 90, and 87, and has had 2 scores. So this duo has been absolutely ridiculous in the postseason thus far, against Oregon, against SMU, and then obviously against Boise State last week. These are the two that are going to take them to a national title, one way or the other. They are the two that are going to decide if they get in, if they don't. Obviously, the offensive line in conjunction with these two is going to do that. But at the end of the day, these are the two that if we look back in a couple of weeks, we're going to say it was Kaytron Allen, it was Nick Singleton that created nightmares for just about everyone else in this thing. And then the other part is Drew Aller. You don't want your youngest quarterback in the field right now. You don't want him to have to carry all of the load. You definitely want these guys to carry a little bit of the load, and then let Drew Aller be the guy that he definitely is capable of being. These two guys definitely need to be the ones that carry the load initially, and then obviously Penn State can take over in some different respects later on. But I think when we look back, at least offensively, it's going to be these two, number 13, number 10, leading the way to a Penn State national title. And then on the defensive side of the ball, it's the game wrecker, the guy that I think is the best defensive player left in this thing, the guy that I think can truly just deliver Penn State a national title. He is an absolute difference maker in every sense of the word. He is a dude that can take over every single game you play in. Now, the question is, will he be a full go tonight? I think he is going to play. Is a game time decision, but I have to imagine that number 11 is not going to be able to stay off that field. And the other big part of this is the O-lineman that he is likely going to face is Anthony Knapp tonight, very talented freshman All-American. Kelvin Banks going to be a first-round pick, probably a top 10 pick here in April, and then Donovan Jackson. And then you have some other guys on the other side. You have Josh Fryer for Ohio State. You have Cam Williams, another first-rounder for Texas. You have very, very talented guys. Maybe Charles Jagusa gets a little bit of run at tackle for Notre Dame tonight. So a lot of different guys that he's going to have to deal with that are going to have to deal with him, probably more likely, but he's the guy that can totally change everything. He's the guy that can chase down Riley Leonard in space tonight. He's the guy that in the possible national title can make Quinn Ewers and Will Howard's life just an absolute nightmare. And then for Notre Dame, they are who they are. They are not going to change that. You will not see a new Notre Dame tonight. You will not see Riley Leonard throw the ball 35 times. You will not see Jeremiah Smith not get the ball tonight. Jeremiah Love, not get the ball tonight, because the reality is that's just who they are, and it's a really beautiful thing to watch. When you talk about old school hard-nosed football, that's what they're playing over there in South Bend, Indiana, and they've been incredibly, incredibly good at it. I fully understand that maybe the schedule hasn't been the toughest thing in the world, and people had a lot of questions, including myself, going into this thing. I didn't even pick them tonight, so I am going to lean towards Penn State in this one, but the reality is they are going to attack you on the ground. They're going to be very disciplined on defense. They're not going to give you a lot of mistakes, and they're going to find a way to win the margins. That is the way that they play football. That is the way that Marcus Freeman has taught them to play football, and he's become one of the best head coaches in the country because of it. It's been incredible to watch this team go about their business and really just not be phased, not change who they are, not change the way that they go about business, because a lot of other people are doing it differently. They're going to play Notre Dame football, and no one's going to get them off of that. And that is a huge reason why they're here. That will be a huge reason why they win the national title if they do, because their execution and what they do is exactly how they're going to go about business, and they do it about as well as anyone in this field right now. The other part of this is I think they play the best three-phase football you have seen in the entire country right now, because when you look back at that Ohio State game, that Georgia game a couple of weeks ago, when you look back at that Georgia game, you had 2 field goals, you had the kick return. They essentially won the game. Special teams essentially won that game for them. Mitch Jeter, since he has gotten healthy, has been incredibly, incredibly better than he was in the regular season. Came into this thing around 50% on field goals and has only missed 1 in the first 2 games. Definitely a huge piece of this, where you have a Notre Dame team. You know they're going to be really good on defense. You know they're not going to make a lot of mistakes on offense. These are the margins. You know, the special teams are the margins, the penalties, the turnovers, those types of things are going to be the things that Notre Dame tends to thrive in. And if they're going to win a national title, they have to thrive in all 3 different phases: the offense, defense, and then obviously special teams to get everything together. For Texas, the biggest thing is this defense is going to give you shots. Even against a team like Ohio State, who's just going insane as of right now, I think this defense will give them chances to win on Friday. The question is, will the offense take it? And that's kind of been the question all year. You know, against A&M, Clemson, Arizona State, they had a goal line stop that really gave them a little bit of control in this game, kept them in a position to be very much in a position to win that game. Obviously, Arizona State was able to overcome that and come back, but in the A&M and Clemson game, those stops were the game at the end of the day, and this back end has been absolutely incredible, one of the best in the country. They're going to have to deal with a lot against Ohio State, but the reality is this defense is one of the very best in the country. They've been able to heat up quarterbacks like really no one else. They've been able to play coverage on the back end like no one else, and they will give this offense opportunities. Possibly, maybe it has to be a little bit earlier in the game because maybe this offense kind of wears them down, doesn't stay on the field as much as they should, but the reality is this Texas defense will give them chances to win. It just comes down to the offense executing those chances, and it'll come down to this connection. The Ewers Golden connection is another reason that Texas can win a national title, plainly because it's been as lethal as just about any connection, including Will Howard and Jeremiah Smith in these first 2 games. In the postseason for Matthew Golden, 360 yards, 17 catches on 26 targets, 2 games over 145 yards receiving. The kid is absolutely incredible, and the Quinn Ewers obviously feels very comfortable going to Matthew Golden in really any scenario you can imagine. Hit him for this pass on a huge 3rd down, obviously got him on that 4th and 13, hit him on a couple of different 2-point conversions. Very, very important player as you get throughout the rest of this tournament, and the reality is sometimes you just need that one guy where you can say number 2 is going to be down there, he's going to be able to make a play, you throw it up to him in single coverage, he's going to make a play a lot of the time. So when you look back at the Ohio State game, if Texas is on top, I have to imagine that Matthew Golden had a huge reason for that, and I have to imagine he'll be a huge reason if they find a way to win that national title. And then we got Ohio State, and it starts with the matchup nightmares. Those two guys are just absolutely ridiculous to guard. Obviously, Jeremiah Smith is the guy. He is the guy that is going to be an absolute nightmare. I've seen some different people try some different things about how they could possibly defend him tomorrow. The reality is there's no good way to defend him. I would have to imagine that they're going to bracket him likely with, I would have to assume at least, Malik Muhammad as well as a safety over top, whether it's Makuba or it's Michael Taff or someone like that. And then they'll put Jahdae Barron on Emeka Egbuka. That's been the idea that has been kicked around a lot, something that a lot of different defenses will follow when they're facing two guys that are so talented. They'll put cornerback 2 and a safety on the top guy. Then they'll put cornerback 1 on the second best guy. That's kind of just the way that people go about business. Now, that doesn't mean that these guys can't be attacked. You know, Malik Muhammad, Jalen Gilbo at different points this year have been a little bit shaky in coverage, so there will be places where Emeka Egbuka can really get after this team, especially Emeka Egbuka at different points throughout this game. But overall, if you get these guys in single coverage, it is going to be a mismatch. Now, Texas probably has the closest to making this not a mismatch when you talk about their corners, but at the end of the day, these guys are absolute nightmares to deal with, and they are going to be the guys that really make a difference for this Ohio State offense as they move forward. And then the seniors' mission. This one is a little bit harder to understand, but with all the craziness around Jeremiah Smith, I think we've forgotten what the bedrock of this team is and why this team was so special coming into this year. It wasn't necessarily Jeremiah Smith. It wasn't necessarily Will Howard or Quinshon Judkins or Caleb Downs even. It was Denzel Burke. It was Jack Sawyer. It was JTT. It was Trey Henderson. It was a million other guys that should be getting ready for the NFL playoffs right now, that should be in NFL jerseys all around the country getting ready to play that upcoming game. They're getting ready to play this one. They came back for this reason. They came back to win a national title, and that's something we'll talk about here in a second is this game, you win it, congratulations, we got to keep moving. That's the reality of their situation right now, and if they win a national title, it won't necessarily be because of all the guys they brought in from the portal. Obviously, Will Howard will play a huge part in that. It won't necessarily be because of all the flashy parts of this team. It will be because of the bedrock of this team, and that's those seniors, that's Jack Sawyer and all those guys that decided to forego the NFL, come back for one more year, and try to win a national title. If they win one, it'll be because in January they made a decision that they're going to come back and they're going to fight for that trophy, and we'll see if they can finally pull it off. But it's awesome. These four teams are really, really incredible. They all have incredible things about them. Obviously have some shaky things about them all around them, but at the end of the day, there are big, big reasons why they can possibly win a national title. I think maybe the biggest one of the bunch is that senior mission for Ohio State, but we'll see what happens there. Definitely we'll break that down in the coming days, but let's take our first break here, and when we come back, let's do a little bit of a fallout of the wins and losses in the next couple of days. What would the fallout be from the fan base, the national media, the head coaches, everything in between? Let's talk about it right after this, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows where 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the reasons that these teams can win a national title. What are the things that we're going to look back on? Penn State, Ohio State, Notre Dame, and Texas. If they lift that trophy, what are the things we're going to look back on and say, that is why they did that? That is why they were able to pull that off. Obviously, the Ohio State mission from those seniors is a huge reason for that. But let's get into the possible fallout of the CFP semifinals. Obviously, two incredible games the next couple of days and a lot of consequences that could be waiting on the other side of this. And it's kind of hard to contextualize what this possibly could look like. It's kind of hard to get an idea of what this will look like after a loss or a win, except for that Ohio State loss. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, but let's start with a little bit of fun. Let's start with Penn State winning tonight. If Penn State wins tonight, I think it's a program-changing moment. Not only for Drew Aller, not only for Tyler Warren, not only for all of the players on that team, but James Franklin especially. You know, he would totally change the way that he is perceived around the national public. Everyone is waiting for James to mess up tonight. I promise you that. I've seen a lot of people on Twitter that have said James Franklin's going to find a way to lose this game. Marcus Freeman obviously did a great job against Georgia. People are thinking that's going to carry over and that's going to make the difference in this game. If he finds a way to win, if Penn State finds a way to win tonight, as I think they will, everyone will be looking at James Franklin in a different light. No one will be trying to make the argument that he can't win the big one when that's never really been a reality for big-time coaches. The reality is this guy is 60 minutes away from, I don't want to say immortality, but a different level of what he is as a college football coach. He is going to be on that upper echelon level. He's going to be Kirby Smart, a couple other guys, and then James Franklin right there, top 5, top 10, however you want to cut it. The reality is this program will entirely change. I don't think people fully understand what Penn State can be if everything falls into place. If they can lift a national trophy, if all of those people, all of those recruits can see them do that, I think recruiting could get absolutely crazy for this team. They have all the money in the world. They have all the resources in the world, and you'd be surprised how many ridiculously talented guys you can find up in that area. So it's going to be awesome to watch what would happen if they were able to win tonight, move on to a national title, and possibly change the way that James Franklin has looked like. There might be a little bit of a negative, and we'll talk about that likely in the NFL draft segment, but definitely something that would make a huge difference for this program and could make Penn State a really, really hard team to stop going forward. As for a loss, let's just be totally honest, it's going to sit on that guy's shoulders. That's just the reality of the situation. He is defined by this game, by Ohio State, by Michigan, by the elite teams that he plays throughout his career. So in this season, he will have lost to Ohio State, Oregon, and Notre Dame. Those are the 3 elite teams on your schedule, plain and simple. Now, Illinois I thought was a great win. I thought USC was a great win. I thought Wisconsin was a great win. None of those are going to get you over the hump. None of those are going to make people look at you all that differently. And the biggest thing here is we all talked about it. Penn State is going to benefit greatly from the 12-team playoff, expanding to the 12-team, getting more teams into the field because they were right there for so many different 4-team playoffs. The reality is you're now in the 4-team playoff. You now found your way here. I would argue that it would have gone a little bit differently. Selection Sunday, if it were a 4-team, I think Notre Dame might have gotten bumped above them, but that's a conversation for another day. Obviously something that we can debate endlessly, frankly, because it's unknown. But at the end of the day, you lose this game, Penn State fans will feel very similar to the way that they felt the last couple of years. They will just feel like they had a different patch on the jersey this time around, and that's going to be a tough pill to swallow. There's no doubt about that. You beat SMU, you beat Boise State. Those are 2 really good wins. Those are 2 CFP wins. They're not the wins that you've been waiting for. They're not the wins that have eluded you your entire career, and they're not the wins that Penn State fans really want to see. They want to see this one, and I think this season will feel like 1 step forward and 1 step backwards the second that you lose this game. If you do lose, if you do win, obviously some great things waiting for you, but I have to imagine that James Franklin will have a lot on his shoulders tonight. Moving forward into Notre Dame, what would happen if they win? And it would change the way college football works going forward. And I don't want to get, too grandiose or too crazy with this or too hyperbolic, but there is a reality here. Notre Dame is an independent team. That is what they are. They have been that way for a long time. We'll talk about that tomorrow. James Franklin made some interesting comments around that, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. I would love for them to be in a conference, but here's the reality. They've been able to kind of pick and choose their schedule for quite some time. They lost to an NIU team early in the year. They've been able to bounce back from that in large part because they've played teams that they've been able to kind of muscle against. A Florida State team that was playing terrible football, they were able to muscle. Even USC, late in that game, they were able to muscle down the stretch. So you look at this team, they have all the ability in the world. And you look at a couple other teams around the country, they're going to see that team lose to NIU in the second week of the season, go on to win a national title partly because of the schedule that they played. And I think some people are going to look in that direction. All that being said, it's not necessarily to say that Texas, the second that this ends, is going to jump into being an independent. It's not to say, Ohio State's going to follow or all those teams. I'd be a little bit surprised if that were to happen. But I can promise that certain people behind the scenes will be pushing for that. I don't think it's going to unfold, but it's definitely something to think about. The other part of this is if they win this game, if they move on to a national title, I think Marcus Freeman's the hottest name on the coaching market, and you can include the NFL in that as well. I think he's going to be a huge name, and I think Notre Dame is going to have to fend off a lot of suitors, especially at the NFL level, if they're able to get to a national title tonight. Now, if they were to lose, this is a confusing conversation because I don't want to sit here and say it wouldn't make a difference. I don't want to sit here and say it doesn't matter if they lose tonight. It obviously does. All these fans, all these teams absolutely want to win this game. But when you look at what this season has been for Notre Dame, they lost to that NIU team. They have been entirely different since that game. They have played incredibly clean, incredibly smart football. Marcus Freeman has risen to one of the highest heights he has had as a coach, has been really regarded as one of the top guys in this tournament thus far, and he's definitely someone that you're going to think great things about regardless of what happens tonight. So I think when you look at this team, if they lose tonight, it's going to hurt. I'm not saying that it's not going to hurt. I'm not saying that it's not going to be devastating. But I do think it's going to be one of those things where you're going to look back on this season and say, we lost a game in week 2 that should have buried us. And we found our way back to the CFP. We were able to beat a Georgia team that was looking for their 3rd title in 4 years. And we're going to move forward. You obviously have the quarterback question with Riley Leonard walking out the door, but at the end of the day, he is definitely a guy that is going to be really loved going forward regardless of what happens tonight. So not to say it doesn't matter, it obviously does, but I definitely do think there's a little bit more leeway for Notre Dame if they were to lose tonight than there would be for the rest of these teams on this. And Anthony, you make a great point. Maybe it isn't a head coach position. Maybe he's not quite ready for that. Maybe they want to see a couple more years of sustained success at Notre Dame, but absolutely, a defensive coordinator position, a defensive line coach, linebacker coach. He was a linebacker at Ohio State, so it'll be interesting. He also is fantastic at recruiting. So maybe he just loves the college football world and wants to stick around down here, but he's one of those names that I think could kind of get that look down the road, maybe a little bit more than I'm thinking as of right now. But if they lose, I don't know. I think Notre Dame fans will walk away from this one feeling, at the very least, very hopeful for what the future holds. A little bit upset that they missed this opportunity, but I don't think it'll linger quite as long as the rest of these will. Then you got a win for Texas. This is a fascinating one for so many different reasons. A lot of people would be very upset. Let's just be totally honest. They would be moving on to their first national title since 2009. They would be back on top of the sport. There's no doubt about that. They've done it 2 years in a row now. They will have taken that one extra step than what they did last year, and they're going to leave people behind, especially in their state. When you talk about the biggest school in the state, the biggest football state in the nation, if they can lock down Texas to the degree that a lot of people have not seen them do it in quite some time, it's going to be a nightmare. I'll just be totally honest. Now, the recruiting profile is already ridiculous. They were in the number 1 class this past cycle. They will continue to be among the top 5, top 3 classes in the country going forward for quite some time. But if Texas sets up shop at the top of this sport, they're going to be really hard to tear down, especially in the NIL era. That's just the reality of what Texas has right now. There is a world where Texas could become, I'm not going to say Alabama. I don't think that's going to happen, if I'm being totally honest. But I do think there's going to be a moment where everyone looks up and says, how are we going to chase this team that has all the oil money in the world, that has all the ability in the world, and has a head coach that just won his national title? That's probably going to be looked at as the second best coach in college football if he's able to win these next 2 games. And let's see what Anthony has to say here. That is an interesting question. What does happen if Texas were to win? And that's something we'll actually talk about here in a second, because it's hard to understand, if I'm being totally honest with you. But I promise we'll get to that here in a second here. But Texas, if they were to lose, this would be the Sark can't win the big one crowd. They would run rampant all over this thing. Now, I wouldn't necessarily be a part of that crowd. I do think all of these coaches have the capability to win a national title. I think that will be the case even if 2 of them lose tonight, even if Sarkisian loses tonight by 40 points. or tomorrow by 40 points. I still think he has the ability to lift that national title. Now, it will add some questions. There's no doubt about that. It'll add some questions to Quinn Ewers' legacy. I think he's pretty firmly the third best quarterback in Texas history, but definitely could change some things as you move forward, and definitely will be interesting to watch what happens as you move forward in that. But then the other part of this is, what happens with Quinn Ewers? How do people deal with him? What the next step is? Does he go to the NFL the way that I think he will? Or does this loss kind of spur him to possibly transfer somewhere else? It is Arch Manning time in Austin. That has been made abundantly clear, so that's not changing, but it could possibly change the way that Quinn Ewers looks at the next couple of months and what decision that he wants to be made. And Anthony, you're entirely right. There are a couple of teams that are sitting in big-time cities that are just waiting to explode, and USC would be one of them. Wish they would have done it by now, but some behind-the-scenes stuff has gotten in the way. Miami has really started to do that. I think Houston is another one to really, really watch. Absolutely. SMU in Dallas has done incredible things, so it's going to be fun to watch. Even one way off the radar to watch, Georgia Tech is in the smack dab center of Atlanta. If they can get some of their alumni on board, some things can get special over there in Atlanta. I don't expect that to happen soon, so don't hold your breath there, but definitely will be something interesting to watch. But Ohio State, if they won this, they would already be talked about as the national champion. I can absolutely promise you that. People will be saying, well, it's Penn State, they were able to beat them earlier in the year, or, well, it's Notre Dame. All they can do is run the ball, and Ohio State can stop the run like no one else. I promise you, people would be crowning Ohio State. They would be calling them national champions. They would be talking about them right up next to the 2019 LSU team, and that would be absolutely insane. But that would be what would unfold. I can almost promise you that. And then you do look at kind of the issue for this is something that is kind of the issue for Ohio State this entire year. It would only last 24 hours. This, great, really fun. We loved it. It was awesome watching you beat Texas. You better win the Natty. That's the reality of the position that they're in. That's the reality of what this season has been for them. You lose to Michigan. You miss out on a chance to win the Big Ten. You are going to have to win the national title. So you're going to have your fun. People are going to, throw parades for you. People are going to be happy, no doubt about that. But I can absolutely promise you that they're going to turn around the next day and say, if you don't win the national title, I'm right back against you. And yeah, I mean, the Quinn situation is one that's a little bit complicated, Anthony. I think when you look at a couple of different people around that program that I have, in the past have known to be very, very trustworthy, they tend to think that he's going NFL. But frankly, I'm not sure the people inside Texas, outside of, Steve Sarkisian and a couple other people, would know that right about now. So from where I'm standing, I do think he's going to go to the NFL, but I do think there's a moment where $6 million is on the table from a Miami or from a Notre Dame or from an Oregon. Some things get interesting in a hurry, and I'll just leave it at that for the time being. But I definitely do think it's going to be very interesting. And let me get to this right here. So I don't think let's actually get into this right now, actually. If Ohio State loses, it would be chaos. I'm not arguing that it wouldn't be chaos. It would be off the walls craziness. Fans would be calling for Ryan Day's job left and right, this, that, and the other. Ryan Day's not going anywhere. I feel very, very confident saying that at this point. Frankly, I felt confident going into the Oregon game that he was not going anywhere if they lost that game. Now, there is a question of what would happen behind the scenes. How would they kind of handle this? Would they try to, renegotiate that contract to change some different things to make it easier to move on from him? There are some questions. I'm not doubting that around Ryan Day. There will be about 1 million questions about what the future would hold for him in Ohio State. Is he going into 2025 with a chance to not even get out of the season? 1 million different things that will be up for debate when you talk about that. They're not getting blown out. I can absolutely promise you that. I don't think either of these teams is really prone to getting blown out, if I'm being totally honest with you. So I'd be surprised if this one was decided by more than 20 points, let's say. Ohio State's been so good that I want to set it a little bit high, but at the end of the day, I don't think anyone's getting blown out, regardless if they do. I don't think Ryan Day's going anywhere. I do think there will be some people very mad about that, but I don't think Ryan Day's going anywhere, and I think the fallout of these games could get a little bit ugly in certain respects. I think James Franklin would have a lot of people yelling at him. I think Ryan Day would have the world yelling at him for the next couple of months, but it'll be interesting to watch unfold, and something we'll talk about, Anthony, actually tomorrow. We'll get into this in a little bit more detail. There's been some ideas thrown out by some people that are around the industry that says maybe Ryan Day should call it quits regardless. Just leave Ohio State regardless of what happens this tomorrow or in the national title. He should just walk out the door. And that's something that we'll jump into probably maybe a little bit later. Maybe if they lose on Friday, we'll jump into it on Monday. But I definitely want to touch on that because that is an interesting idea that I don't think is as crazy as some people are thinking right now. But we'll get into that in time. Definitely going to be incredible to watch the fallout of this and hope it doesn't get too wild out there on the Twitter streets. But at the end of the day, let's take our second break here. And when we come back, let's talk about the Rose Bowl. A lot of people have been asking, should the Rose Bowl be the national championship every single year? I'm a little bit questionable about this. I'm up in the air. Definitely some people that love it, and we'll talk about it right after this, give some pros and cons, and we'll stick right after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, everyone, welcome back. We just got into what would the fallout be from all these wins and losses this upcoming weekend. I think we all know that Ohio State losing will probably be the most explosive. And Anthony had a great question here. Who are some people to look out for to possible coordinator positions at Miami or anywhere else, really? There's a number of different openings around the country, and I think there's a couple of guys to watch. You know, some of these guys I don't have off the top of my head. Whoever coaches the DBs for Notre Dame should absolutely be on this list. I just cannot remember the name as of right now. But Larry Johnson coaches the D-line for Ohio State, has done an incredible job for them throughout the years. He's pretty much set up shop in Columbus, so I'd be a little bit surprised if he found his way elsewhere, but very talented guy, absolutely someone you could think about. Johnny Nansen is the linebacker coach for Texas. He came over from Arizona State being the defensive coordinator there, so has a little bit of experience. That was a solid defense for Arizona, and then you move him over to Miami. A lot more talent to work with. So a couple of different names to definitely be on the lookout for. I've seen Tyler Santucci as kind of the big name for that Miami job, the Georgia Tech defensive coordinator. So we'll kind of get into coaching carousel tomorrow, and maybe I'll look at a couple other guys that could be up for some different jobs from this Final Four team, and I'll get into that in a little bit more depth tomorrow. And Anthony, let's jump into that. Let's talk about what the Rose Bowl should be. Should it be the national championship permanent venue? Should it be just the Rose Bowl, as it always has been? And I think there's a good argument on both sides. So let's go ahead and jump into a couple of different pros on this issue. And I think one of the biggest pros, one of the ones that a lot of people have thrown out there, one of the ones that one of the big-time guys in the industry, Joel Klatt, has been in huge favor of this for a number of years. And one of the big things that he kind of circles as why we should do this is it would help the portal in some respects. It would definitely change the way that the portal would work going forward, because you might have a little bit of an opening after that January 1st date to kind of get a little bit of a portal window, whether that's a week long, whether that's 2 weeks long, whether it starts after teams lose their bowl games. There's a different logistics to figure out. I'm not arguing that, and it wouldn't necessarily be the perfect situation after this championship game, but I do think it would give more of an opening to kind of declutter the postseason of college football just a little bit, allow the bowl games, allow the CFP to kind of stand alone, be the main part of the sport, not a million guys going a million different places all at the same time. It would give us at least a little bit more structure, it feels like. Now, I still think there would have to be a little bit of overlap, because giving guys, 7 days from the 1st to the 8th to transfer, to get in there, to transfer, and then to find a place to enroll in school is quite a lot. There's no doubt about that. So this is definitely something that is going to have to be tweaked, have to be figured out, but I do think it would give the opening to kind of not get rid of the winter portal area, but definitely handle the portal era just a little bit better. And Anthony, you make a great point, and that's something that we should touch on here really quickly. Hope that everyone in LA is very, very safe. Hope everyone in LA and everyone around the Rose Bowl is taking all the precautions they need, keeping their family safe, doing everything they need to, and that is definitely something to factor into this. As upsetting as that is, it's a very, very terrifying situation, and if people were there for the national title right now, that would definitely create some problems. So it is something to think about. Obviously, not the biggest thing to think about right about now. Definitely something that the biggest thing going on. Absolutely hope everyone is healthy, safe, and taking care of their business over there, and hope it ends as soon as possible, obviously. But definitely an interesting idea here. A definite pro is maybe you could just declutter this December that we have in the sport. That is an absolute nightmare. That is a realistic thing that could happen, and this would definitely at least subside that a little bit better, get the season done a little bit earlier, then you could handle the portal and everything that goes absolutely crazy after that. Obviously, this is the most obvious pro. There's no doubt about that. This is an elite venue in this sport. Now, I've heard some different things. Some people have some different takes about this, and I fully understand that. Everyone has their own, love. Everyone has their own wants when it comes to college football stadiums. But this is a beautiful place. There's no doubt about that. It is absolutely maybe on the top of my bucket list when it comes to stadiums that I'd like to go to, and that bucket list is way too long. So we're going to have to get to work here pretty soon, but the Rose Bowl is just next level. The pageantry of that place, the energy of that place, and the ability for all of the people in that place to say, we are the Rose Bowl. We are not going to flinch. We are not going to change. Now, I wish they would flinch just a little bit on start times, and we talked about that after those quarterfinal games, but at the end of the day, it is a clear pro. It is a beautiful thing that this Rose Bowl, that this stadium, more than anything else, has kind of held what college football is for so long. It's held what, college football has been about, which is tradition and keeping everything in place and making sure everything is locked in, and that's kind of the beautiful thing about the Rose Bowl is they set up who they are, and they haven't flinched since, and I think that's a beautiful thing. I think some people don't love that. I don't love it at different times as well. So we can battle back and forth on that one, but it is an elite venue, absolutely one that has a lot of college football history, and that is a big-time pro in this. And Anthony, I fully agree with you. I think it's an absolute nightmare that we even have a winter portal cycle. I think there's a number of different things that we can get into throughout that time, and I think the portal cycle is something that we're absolutely going to have to deal with going forward. I would get rid of the winter one, just have a spring one. That's a decision that a lot of people don't love. So it's going to be a battle back and forth, and definitely something that we're going to have to figure out. But hopefully I got to all your comments here. And yeah, we'll talk about that rotation idea that you had here in a second. But the other pro is home field would kind of be a non-factor, and I promise I'm not trying to disrespect USC or UCLA fans, so please do not get mad at me in the comments. Love my guy Liam Blutman over there at Barstool Sports, does a great job covering this sport, but at the end of the day, this is the reality of the situation. If you were to pick out two Power 4 programs that maybe don't have quite the passion that a lot of these other programs do, you'll probably pick out those two from LA. Let's just be totally honest. So when you look at this stadium, it's always split. You always have Oregon on one side, Ohio State on one side, or Penn State on one side, Utah on the other side. It is incredible what they've been able to do. Now, the one thing that I will say, and this is the case for every single neutral site matchup you could ever have, split it at the 50-yard line. I don't know why everyone doesn't do this. I know the Cotton Bowl does it with Texas and OU. It is the best way to do a neutral site atmosphere because you got home game on one side, you got an away game on the other side, and it's an absolute nightmare to deal with. Ask anyone that has played in the Red River rivalry, they will tell you that as well. So that would be my only tweak to this. It is an elite atmosphere. Home field would just not be a huge factor. Now, I love USC fans. I would love to see USC playing in this game, in a national title game, possibly in the Rose Bowl going forward. I don't think they would necessarily overwhelm an Ohio State or a Texas in that moment, is the way that I'll put that for the time being. Don't want to disrespect anyone, but those are the pros. Some really great things, some portal help that possibly could come, some great things about the venue. What are the cons? And the biggest one to me is the schedule conflicts. It would be an absolute nightmare to try to figure this out, to try to get to the point where you get from 12 teams to 2 teams for by January 1st. It's going to be a nightmare. These December matchups, let's just say, or this year, is the best example because the SEC Championship, the Big Ten Championship, all of the championships happened on December 7th. If you played the game on December 14th, if you played the first round, first of all, you'd be getting in the way of that game. And that's not something that I want. I don't think that's something that a lot of different people want around the sport. I want that to be a standalone game. I want them to have their own day, plain and simple. I'll just leave it at that for the time being. I very much want that to be left alone. But let's just say they do play those first round games on that Saturday, on the 14th. They play the quarterfinal games on the 21st. They play the semifinal games on the 28th. That gives you about 4 days before you have to get to January 1st. It's just too much. So you're going to have to find a way to possibly push back the regular season. That's really the only idea that I have. Start week 1 on week 0 and then just move forward from there. I don't think it's a very, very viable idea, if I'm being totally honest with you. I think this is a massive hurdle, and how much time you give teams between conference championships in each round, you want to give them a little bit more time because you want the best teams on the field. You want the most healthy teams on the field. And this would be a really, really hard time to do it. And the reality is, Rose Bowl is being played at 3 p.m. or what is it out there? At 2 p.m. At 2 p.m. On New Year's Day, regardless. They are not changing that. That is not going anywhere. There's no question about that. So, plain and simple, that is the way it's going to be going forward. Don't even question it. So they have to find a way to get there on the first. They have to find a way to get to 2 teams before the first, and that is a tall order for just about any way you cut this thing. And then you would have bowl games after the title. And this is more of a confusing one, kind of a nitpicky one more than anything else. So not necessarily trying to tear apart at this idea, but it would just be weird. I like the idea of when the national championship ends, you say, okay, that's college football for the year. I've gotten everything that I needed to know, and that's going to be the way that everything unfolds. It's going to be interesting to watch all of that unfold, and definitely going to be something to watch. But the reality is, I wouldn't necessarily love to see the Gator Bowl after we've already had the national championship crown. That's just kind of the way that I work. A little bit of a nitpicky thing. Also, small tidbit here that we will talk about tomorrow in a little bit more detail. Ole Miss and BYU seem to be going after each other on Twitter and possibly giving a hypothetical matchup. I don't think it's going to happen, but we'll talk about it. We'll see if we can get that to happen, because frankly, we talked about it in our production meeting yesterday. Would love just like chaos matchups in between the semifinals and the championship. Just give us all the grudge matches you can possibly give us. I'd sign up for that 10 times out of 10. But Anthony had a good point here. The playoffs should be at the beginning of January to the beginning of February, and the conference championship should be December. I got what you're saying here. Would be interesting. There's no doubt about that. There would be a lot of different ideas that could be thrown around. Maybe you have your portal window and then you have playoff time. Maybe you have playoff time and then the portal window. So it's going to be a nightmare. Let's just be totally honest. I tend to believe the cleanest one is just getting rid of that winter portal window. Apologies, but that's my idea as far as I'm concerned. Get rid of that winter portal window. Have guys leave if the coach gets fired, that type of thing, but nothing else, and then open it up in the spring and let guys go where they may. That's the way that I see it. There's obviously some different ideas out there, and we'll see what they come up with. But then, no primetime matchup. And this is another one that might not be a huge deal to a lot of people. I don't know how people feel about this. I don't know if people need it to be at 8 p.m. at night or anything like that. But I do think it adds a little bit. I'll be totally honest with you. I think the build-up, the anticipation of this thing is going to kick off at 8 p.m. tonight, we're going to talk about it the entire day. It really does kind of get the juices flowing, really does get the energy in that building, and does give people a little bit more time to, let's say, get hydrated. Let's leave it at that for the time being. But it would give people a little bit more time to enjoy the day. And then you have that game at night. Obviously, over there in Pasadena, it would be at 2 p.m., so would be a little bit different. No doubt about that. Another nitpicky thing, but overall, definitely something to think about as you get in, something the networks will be thinking about heavily. I can promise you that. And then my opinion. I love the Rose Bowl. It's probably the best venue in the sport. I think the Cotton Bowl gives it a good run for its money, but I think it's the best venue in the sport. It's given us some of the greatest moments in the sport, maybe the greatest moment with the 4th and 5 for Vince Young in that championship game against USC. So it's been incredible. There's no doubt about that. I don't see the reason that it needs to be the national title every year. I think it's logistically an absolute nightmare to try to figure out how you're going to get from 12 to 1 before January 1st. And I got to be honest, I kind of like the pseudo home games that some teams get in the playoff. I like the idea that Texas has a little bit of advantage in the Cotton Bowl this upcoming weekend. I loved the idea of LSU playing their national title in New Orleans. that was just cool. It was cool energy. It was something that really, it doesn't happen all that often, so I'm not necessarily mad when it does happen, and I really don't think it has that big of an effect on the game at the end of the day. So I like that aspect of it. That being said, if they were to set up shop in one place, if they were to set up shop and say this is going to be the national title spot every single year, it's the Kibbe Dome. Let's just be totally honest with each other. It's definitely the Kibbe Dome. We got to get to the Kibbe Dome every single year. Obviously, I'm joking, but it would be incredible to see what would happen there, and definitely would make a lot of people very, very mad. But at the end of the day, my personal opinion is the Rose Bowl is good what it is. It's good at what it does. It's good for what it is, and that's kind of a peek back to what college football in some ways used to be. You know, that tradition, that just not moving, just standing very still, that stubborn attitude that we had for quite some time has kind of been lost a little bit, and I do think the Rose Bowl keeps that. And obviously, when you talk about it, Anthony, that is a huge factor. You know, the stadium is not necessarily upkept to the same degree that some of these other NFL stadiums are. The facilities aren't great by any means, so definitely something that'll be factored in. I don't expect this to happen. It doesn't sound like the people at the Rose Bowl are like pushing for this aggressively, so it should be fine, no doubt about that, but definitely something that was brought up. I don't necessarily am huge favor in that. I like the idea of kind of rotating it around. If you're going to have it in one place, put it up there in Idaho in the Kibbe Dome. Let's have some fun. But at the end of the day, let's take our third break here. And when we come back, let's get to a little bit of early NFL draft look. There's a lot of guys that have been jumping in, so I wanted to make sure you guys got an idea of all the top quarterbacks, top defenders, and just some other guys you're going to want to watch as we get into the draft process. Going to be a crazy one, and we'll break it all down right after this.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the Rose Bowl and if it should be the national championship spot every single year. And Anthony, I do like that rotation idea. I think I love the idea of them playing for the Orange Bowl as well as the national title. That was something obviously they did back in the day. Definitely something that I think would be huge and something that I just think would give a little bit more flavor to that national title game that has gotten a little bit corporate, a little bit of that Super Bowl feel around the national title the last couple of years. Would love to do away with that, and I think adding it to a bowl game would definitely help that. So definitely would be in favor of that, just in favor of rotation in general, whatever that looks like going forward. The NFL draft. It is something that has started to pop up in the college football world, and it's the time of year where we get to blur the lines just a little bit between the NFL, between the NFL and college football, and a lot of different things go into this. But let's take a quick early look at the 2025 NFL Draft, and that is a big-time question, isn't it, Anthony? Will Malachi Starks still be the top safety after the playoff unfolds? I would tend to say yes. I do think people look at Malachi Starks as just a remarkably elite back-end safety, kind of middle-of-the-field Kyle Hamilton type guy, that I think it's going to be hard to knock him off that perch of number one, but definitely something that could happen for Xavier Watts, and frankly, regardless of where Xavier Watts goes, he's going to make a difference in this game, or at the next level. But at the end of the day, let's go ahead and jump into this, and we'll get into like every piece of this later on, I promise you that, but just an early look at where we stand right now, and we'll start with the top quarterbacks in this draft. Cam Ward kind of leads the way. These are all from CBS Sports for the time being. I will have my own rankings a little bit later on, just didn't quite have time with all the craziness going on, so wanted to make sure that was said because this is not how I would rank these quarterbacks. But Cam Ward is number one right here. Shedeur Sanders number two. I think we all understand those are the guys leading the way. And there have been some people that have said they don't have first-round grades on them. There have been some people that have said, they shouldn't even go until the second or third round. These guys are going in the first round. And frankly, they're probably going in the top 10, top 5 picks. Let's just be totally honest. That's how the NFL draft works. There will be guys that will reach for quarterbacks, and that's the other group I want to talk to you about. Jalen Milroe, Quinn Ewers, Jackson Dart, Carson Beck, and even Dylan Gabriel is someone I would add to this list that isn't on this list for some reason. But the reality is, I do think you look at those four or five guys, I think two of them are taken in the first round, and I can't necessarily say who those two will be. It'll obviously be decided over the next little bit. I have an idea of who those two will be, but at the end of the day, I think between those five, you will have two more that will go in the first round. Both of them will be reaches. I can almost promise you that. I don't think there's a quarterback outside of those two in Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders that I would think about taking in the first round, but let's be honest, that's the way this thing works. Quarterbacks are always drafted just a little bit higher than they probably should be. I think there will be at least four first-round quarterbacks. It's going to be a weird group there. I can almost promise you that. So that's going to be an interesting thing to watch. And in terms of who's more scheme-dependent between Xavier Watts and Malachi Starks, I think I'd lean Malachi Starks, but frankly, I think they're both so diverse. I think they're both so incredible, and I think they're diverse in kind of different ways. I think Xavier Watts can come down into the box, play some like pseudo linebacker type style, but I think Malachi Starks is one of those guys that you put him in any defense as a center field or safety, he's going to be a nightmare to deal with. So he's very rangy, very smart, and does tackle relatively well at the point of attack. So I think both these guys are relatively not totally scheme dependent. Maybe I'd lean a little bit more Malachi Starks on that one, but definitely a battle between those two and cannot wait to see what they can do at the next level. And then you have the rest of the group. You have Kyle McCord, Curtis Rourke, Riley Leonard, Will Howard. All of these guys, I believe, are third-day picks. Now, what I will say is I do think there are a couple of quarterbacks here that I think guys could fall in love with. And the biggest one to me is the guy that Anthony just said there. Curtis Rourke is someone that I think people could fall in love with. Played the entire year on a torn ACL, had a little bit of a thumb issue going in the back half of that season, is a very, very pro-style quarterback. Is a very confident thrower of the football. Definitely a guy that I think could be quote-unquote fallen in love with throughout this process and go a little bit higher than people are expecting. Will Howard could elevate himself over the next two games. And then I think Kyle McCord's another one where we saw what he did at Syracuse. This guy is does not shy away from anything really. He's definitely a guy that I think will go in the 4th to 7th round, but I don't know. He feels like a guy that I could see being very, very successful at the next level. So overall, very weird quarterback class. Not necessarily a strong quarterback class by any sense of the word, but one that I feel like there's a couple of guys in here that can be really good quarterbacks. I feel like there's a couple of guys in here, whether it's 2 or 3 or whatever, that will end up being quarterbacks for quite some time in the NFL. It's just going to be really hard to figure out who of these 10 are going to end up having good careers. Those top 2 guys feel like safer bets. They don't necessarily feel like safe bets, though. So it'll be really interesting to watch that unfold, and definitely will be something we'll follow going forward. And one of those guys is someone we'll talk about here in a second. But top defensive players in this draft, Travis Hunter leads the way in this and leads the way overall. He is the number 1 overall prospect according to CBS Sports, and it's hard to disagree with that. The guy's an absolute difference maker. The way that I see it right now, he will play cornerback at the next level and then be used at different times on the offensive side of the ball at wide receiver. They could flip that. I don't know. I think it would depend on what team he goes to. But then you do have Will Johnson. Didn't play the back half of the season, but he is a downright top 10 pick, an elite player on the outside, one of the best coverage corners in the country, and definitely will be one of the top guys off the board. Mason Graham, Abdul Carter, the exact same way. I would fully expect them to go in the top 10 unless anything drastic happens over the next little bit. Mason Graham, I expect to be a top 5 pick. Abdul Carter, I expect to be the top edge off the board, not too far after him, if I'm being totally honest. So all those guys, downright elite. James Pierce Jr. is an interesting one because I could see him going in a number of different places, and I think it's going to come down to what Michael Williams, Jalen Walker, and Nick Scourton look like. When you get to combine time, when you get to all of that, what does that look like going forward, and how do people kind of handle that going forward? Going to be really interesting to watch. I think Michael Williams could be able to edge above him. I think even Jalen Walker could have edge above him during this process. But James Pierce Jr., very talented guy. I think all of these guys, really, all those edge rushers I just talked about, 10 to 15 range, maybe 10 to 30 range, will find their way onto an NFL roster. All of them, in my mind, are first-round picks, and you're absolutely right. Mason Graham is definitely the best overall defensive lineman in this class. He is an absolute monster, and frankly, a guy that I would be shocked if he didn't become a star at the next level. And then you do have outside guys. Obviously, Benjamin Morrison bringing up the rear. Deone Walker is going to be an absolute monster, probably a first-day pick. But then you got Jahdae Barron going to be a huge, probably a first-round pick. Princely Umanmiele McMillan. Siobhan Rebel, very talented player. Mike Green from Marshall is an edge rusher that you're going to want to watch very closely. Elite in every sense of the word, and definitely could go higher than a lot of people are thinking right now. But we'll go into the depth a little bit later. But those are the top guys you're going to want to watch out for the defensive side of the ball. Some remarkably talented guys and absolutely guys that can be game changers. Travis Hunter leads the way, but Mason Graham, Abdul Carter, Michael Williams, Malachi Starks, Xavier Watts, it's going to be a special group on the defensive side of the ball, and a lot of guys that I think could have 10-plus NFL year careers. But other players to watch, other guys you're going to want to know about. Tatoria McMillan is going in the first round. He is going in the top 10 at the very least. I think he's mock number 6 right now to the Raiders by Trevor Sikkema over there on PFF. Very talented guy. If they get him on the Raiders with Brock Bowers, ooh, buddy, they just need a quarterback to put it in their general vicinity, and then the game's over. So that's going to be a really interesting thing to watch. Very, very talented player. Pretty much when Travis Hunter is taken, the next wide receiver opening, it is going to be this guy. An absolute freak of nature in every sense of the word, and he is going to be a long-time NFL receiver. Luther Burden, the other receiver you're going to want to watch, he will be off the board pretty early in this thing, probably somewhere between the 10 and 20 range. 17 to the Bengals is where Trevor Sikkema does have him in his mock draft in. That would make sense to me. If you're going to get rid of T. Higgins this offseason, if you're the Bengals, definitely need a guy to fill that gap in. Man, this guy would be a great guy to fill that gap. I really think he is an all-pro type talent player. I think he's a guy that you put him next to Jamar Chase, it's the best 1-2 duo in the entire NFL, and they already have the best 1-2 duo in the entire NFL with him and T. Higgins. But will be really fun to watch this guy go, and wherever he goes, the fans will be very excited. I can promise you that. Kelvin Banks is the number 1 offensive tackle or the number 2 offensive tackle no matter where you look. He is in one of those 2 spots, and he's one of those guys that he's going to be taken the second that someone needs an athletic left tackle. He's so incredible. Now, there has been a little bit of talk of kicking him into guard and having him play a little bit more interior. I think he can do both. I think he's athletic enough to play left tackle, but frankly, I am not quite as trained of an eye as some of these people are. So we'll see what happens there. Very talented guy, and maybe if he does move into guard, maybe he'll drop just a little bit below this guy right here. Will Campbell is a guy you're going to want to watch out for. If Banks is in the offensive tackle number 1, this is your offensive tackle number 1, and Trevor Sikkema has him as the offensive tackle number 1, going into the Patriots as number 4 overall. Travis Hunter was taken at the Browns. So just to give you an idea, I don't think Travis Hunter is getting past the Patriots, just plain and simple. But I do think there are a couple of different openings here, and frankly, this is an immediate starter. This is a 10-year starter. This is possibly a gold jacket guy. He is so darn good, and definitely a guy that I cannot wait to see what he can do at the next level. But yeah, that is definitely a question that will pop up throughout this thing is what will happen with that Tyreek Hill situation, and where do the Dolphins want to go for a wide receiver, and who's open for a wide receiver. You know, there is a player, possibly maybe you do need a big body. I will say that. You need a bigger body than maybe an Isaiah Bond, was just someone I was going to throw out there, but definitely a lot of guys out there. Maybe they trade up and try to get a Luther Burden. He would be a game changer, absolutely. And then you do definitely need some D-line guys. There's no doubt about that. You definitely need some D-line players that can make some big-time plays. I think there are a couple of different guys out there. I think if you want to go a little bit later in the draft, that duo from Texas, when you talk about Alfred Collins and Vernon Broughton, could be very, very talented guys. I think there's a number of guys all across this country. Talik Williams will be on the board from Ohio State, so there's some guys at D-lineman. I think there's going to be a lot of wide receivers for them to go after. It's definitely going to be an interesting offseason for the Miami Dolphins, and the draft will have a lot of work to do. And actually, we'll talk about one of the interesting options that they could explore. I don't think they'll explore, but we'll talk about that here in a second. Ashton Genty, if he is not a Cowboy, what are you doing, Jerry Jones? Plain and simple. He has to be a Cowboy. It is not a question. Don't even think about drafting anyone else. I don't think anyone's going to take him before you at 12. Take this kid. He is the person that you need in your offense. He is the person that can change your offense. Then you fill the offensive line and you move forward. But you need number 2. If you do not draft him at number 12 and you draft some random offensive lineman from North Dakota State, all due respect to North Dakota State, I will lose my mind. I'm not even a Cowboy fan, and I will lose my mind. I'd rather the Cowboys not be good, and I would still lose my mind because it would be one of the craziest decisions I've ever seen. Take Ashton Genty and then figure it else out. I promise you, if you're the Cowboys and you don't do that, you will regret this. But that's it. That's it for Ashton Genty. Go to the Cowboys. If the Cowboys don't pick you, wherever he goes, congratulations, you just got a ridiculous back. But Some decisions you're going to want to watch over the next little bit. Quinn Ewers. This is the million-dollar question. Me and Anthony talked about it a little bit earlier in the show. It definitely is up in the air. There's no doubt about that. The people that I seem to trust around the Texas program have said it's going to be the NFL, it's going to be the NFL, it's going to be the NFL. There's always the reality where they lose tonight. Someone's on the phone with him later tonight, or tomorrow, excuse me. Someone's on the phone with him on Saturday, and things happen pretty quickly. So there is always the reality that he does come back, and definitely will be something to watch. I'd expect him to go in. I don't see him coming back next year against a guy like Drew Aller or against a guy like Garrett Nussmeier and be able to really elevate to the level that he would like to in the NFL draft. I think he will jump in. I think he'll live with whatever the results of that are. Drew Aller is another one we've talked about a little bit throughout this week. I don't think he's going to jump in. I'll be totally honest. I think the only reality is if he plays hero ball over the next 2 games and they win a national title. That's really the only way that I could see him walking out the door. Doesn't mean that NFL scouts aren't calling him pretty much every second of the day right about now, because they look at the quarterback class they have right now, they look at what this kid's capable of, and they say, I might want to lean that direction. But that'll be something very interesting to watch. I don't expect him to go in, but definitely things could change over the next 10 or 14 days, what have you. And then you got Dalen Everett. This is a very interesting one, and one that I don't know. I'm interested in this one because I do think he could go. I do think he could go and get drafted relatively high, be on a good team, and probably get playing time when you talk about the NFL next year. But when I look at this kid and the strides that he's taken over this year, the strides that he's taken to get better in coverage and be one of the best coverage corners really in the entirety of the SEC, I think there's a moment next year where he can become one of the top players in the draft. I think he can become a first-round pick at corner if he were to come back for one more year. I'm obviously not in his corner. I'm not someone speaking into his ear, so obviously he has plenty of people telling him one way or the other of how this thing is going to go forward. But if I'm Dalen Everett, I come back for one more year. I bet on myself, and I say that I'm going to be the top corner coming out, and frankly, I think he very well could be in 2026. Going to be an awesome thing to watch, but definitely someone Georgia would love to have back in. I don't know. I have this gut feeling that he's going to be back in Athens in 2025. But one of the more interesting ones to watch is Nick Singleton and Katron Allen. Pat McAfee might have messed up just a little bit. He was talking on his show and he said allegedly, he did say allegedly, so I'll leave him alone just a little bit, but he said allegedly they are coming back to Penn State for another year. That is a very, very interesting thing. If they do lose tonight and those two come back along with Drew Aller, along with a couple of those wide receivers, and they go out and get a couple of guys, ooh, buddy, Penn State's going to be a lot of fun in 2025, and I'm going to have a ton of fun watching them. But obviously something that we'll unpack in time. These are huge decisions. One way or the other, these guys are going to be huge, huge decisions to watch. And if they go into the draft, they're going into probably the best running back draft that I've seen in quite some time. If they come back, that duo is going to be terrifying for every single defense you face, and Penn State might be right back here next year, if I'm being totally honest. But going to be awesome to watch this unfold. And yeah, I do think there's an argument to be made that I would fully argue that Jalen Milroe should come back for another year. I'm totally on board with you on that. Now, what I will say with Jalen Milroe is kind of what I said with Quinn Ewers. I don't know if they have the ability to really elevate their stock too much next year. I think when you look at next year with Nico Iamaleava and Garrett Nussmeier and Drew Aller and all of these different guys, I think all of these guys are just seeing the quarterback class in front of them and saying, if I can get into an open gym and hit a couple of big-time passes, maybe I can get drafted a little bit higher than people are thinking. So the way that I think about it is maybe they're not all the way there. Not maybe. They're definitely not all the way there. Jalen Milroe and Quinn Ewers. But frankly, I don't know if they're going to be all the way there next year. So maybe it's a little bit of projection for me. Maybe I'm wrong on that. Maybe they could go somewhere else and really explode and become a little bit better and be surefire first-round picks next year. But I look at that quarterback class next year, and I just don't know if Quinn Ewers and Jalen Milroe will have any better time to go into the NFL draft than they will have right now. But obviously will be something that we'll watch very closely. That Quinn Ewers decision will get a lot of press if they were to lose tomorrow. But we'll talk about that in time. Let's take our last break here. When we come back, just a final look at these semifinal games. We'll get into all the different things around Penn State, around Ohio State, and just give a little bit of hype as we get into these last couple of games, and we'll talk about it right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked a little bit about the NFL draft, got into some early looks for that, and Anthony, you might be right, if I'm being totally honest. Maybe he goes to Miami with Shannon Dawson, has a great 2025, really kind of finds his way up the rankings, and he's a very talented quarterback. Maybe it applies a little bit more to Jalen Milroe than it does to Quinn Ewers of coming back won't do you all that much good. I think it could do a little bit of good for Quinn Ewers. I'm not necessarily arguing it would do nothing. I do think the question with Miami and Cam Ward, the one that I had pretty much all year and the one that I would have if Quinn Ewers were to go there, was the big thing with Cam Ward. The thing that kept him alive in a lot of different situations was his escapability. He was so good at getting out of tough pockets, at finding a way to get to open space and then make special things happen with his arm. Not necessarily what you're getting from Quinn Ewers. So, that being said, if you were to go to Miami and the offensive line were to upgrade a little bit more, give them great protection, the run game gets that little bit better, which I tend to believe it's going to, then you could see a fantastic year from Quinn Ewers. You could see him go much higher in the NFL draft. I do think there is a little bit of question around that. So you might be right. Frankly, I think it's a little bit of a toss-up, if I'm being totally honest, what will happen with him and how it will affect him going forward. But definitely will be an interesting thing to watch. And Miami, if he does come back for one more year, Miami, Notre Dame, Oregon. Those are the teams that I'm watching very closely, with Ohio State sprinkled in there just a little bit. But obviously plenty of time to talk about that. If they do fall on Friday, we will talk about that on Monday. I promise you that. But let's go ahead and jump into just a final look at these two games that are going to go on the next couple of days, because they're going to be special, guys. And I know I've talked about them pretty much ad nauseum at this point. We've gotten into just about every nook and cranny you could possibly imagine for these games. But the reality is they're so much fun to talk about. These two games are going to be so cool. They're going to be remarkable to see unfold, and definitely are going to be ones that I just feel like we're gonna remember for quite some time, and I'll talk about that here in a bit. But let's get into Penn State Notre Dame to start, because this is gonna be a fun one. There's no doubt about that. These are two teams that play relatively similar styles, with some ers and ahs added in there for Penn State. But the reality is, two aggressive defenses, talent all over the field, and not just flashy, speedy talent. Hit you in the face talent. Really aggressive guys that I absolutely love to watch, and the best defensive player in the country as far as I'm concerned, Abdul Carter, a one that is very close second, and Xavier Watts on the other side. So going to be awesome to watch this one unfold, and definitely going to be an incredible game. But some matchups to watch as we get into this thing. The Penn State front seven against that Notre Dame run game. Special units on both sides, no doubt about that. That running back, their linebacker core we talked about, but Abdul Carter, Zane Durant, Danny Dennis Sutton, all of these guys on the defensive line for Penn State are just ridiculous. Are just ridiculous in every sense of the word. They are absolutely monstrous players, and you look at this Notre Dame offensive line. I have to keep saying it. They've been absolutely incredible throughout this year. They are still starting guys that are a freshman at left tackle, that are young at right tackle, and those are places that can get exposed at any given game. So there is that worry for me. It definitely will be an interesting thing to watch, and more than anything else, it will be a little bit of Mike Denbrock against Tom Allen, and we'll see who comes out on top in that one. And then Tyler Warren against just the entirety of the Notre Dame defense, if I'm being totally honest, because that's probably what you're going to need to slow down number 44 in this game. And then if you do focus all your energy there, they might just have something different for a Luke Reynolds guy that me and Anthony talked about throughout this week. So overall, it's been awesome to watch this guy play football throughout this year. It's been awesome to watch the Notre Dame defense play football throughout this year. This is going to be a different challenge. It's not necessarily going to be anything like they've seen the first couple of games in the playoff. Definitely not something they've seen before that. And he's just a guy that can do everything you possibly need him to do. He can go up and get 50-50 balls. He can catch a ball underneath and run for 20 yards after the catch. He can block people. He can run the football. He can take snaps. He's a nightmare. Plain and simple. That's the best way to put him. He is an absolute nightmare, and that entire Notre Dame defense is going to find where 44 is on every single play. And then you do have Andy Kotelnicki against Al Golden. Special. Two really special play callers in this one. And Kotelnicki, a very aggressive, very different kind of special guy that plays around with some stuff from time to time. No doubt about that. Al Golden plays one of the most disciplined forms of defense that you will ever find in college football. Who wins out? Does the craziness, does the wild movements of this Penn State offense? Do they change things around? Do they play around with things? And can they get this disciplined defense undisciplined, or is the game for Notre Dame? Do they just continue to play hard-nosed, very smart football on the defensive side of the ball? It's going to come down to those two guys and the play calling they have throughout this game. Then you got the injury report, and frankly, it seems to be okay. Now, Abdul Carter is the big-time question. He is a game-time decision for that game. He won't be 100%. If you're going to try to keep him off the field, I would be surprised if you're able to do that. The reality is this guy's going to want to be on that field, but now the big-time question is, how close to 100% is he? Because the reality is they're probably going to want him to drop into that spy position a lot in this game to kind of take care of Riley Leonard, make sure they don't get those 14-yard conversions that Georgia gave up in that game. This is probably the spot that they want him to be in. Now, the question is, could they just put him in the pass rushing role and then put Kobe King there, or put Tony Rojas there? That is something that they definitely could do. But you want to put your biggest guy in the most important position. That is going to be the most important position tonight. If he's not fully 100%, maybe that's a little bit more up for debate. But obviously something that we'll talk about, depending on what happens tonight. I fully expect him to be on the field. The question is, how close to 100% is he, and how big of an effect can he have on the field? And then for Jeremiah Love on the Notre Dame side, seems like he is quote-unquote good to go. Marcus Freeman said no one is 100%, so Jeremiah Love is not 100% going into this one. But it sounds like him, as well as Howard Cross, are going to be good to go for this game. The question is, again, how close to 100% are they? That could have a big-time effect on the run game for Notre Dame. They were able to keep it up against Georgia just enough. This is going to be a little bit of a different challenge, no doubt about that. So it's going to be really interesting to watch all of this unfold, and it'll be interesting to just see how quickly is Abdul Carter moving early, how fast is Jeremiah Love cutting early, and then we'll be able to figure out what this game has in store for us. But going to be an awesome one, no doubt about that, and definitely one that I cannot wait for. And we just got to talk about it for a second. Give you guys a little bit of hype going into this one, because it's going to be a special one to watch. These are two programs that have not been on the mountaintop since in the 1980s. You could make the argument that Penn State should have been there a little bit sooner, but that's an argument for another day. But Riley Leonard is looking to become a Notre Dame legend in every sense of the word. Go back to the national championship for the first time since 2012 against Alabama. That did not end all that pretty. Drew Aller can become an outright legend in Penn State football. Obviously, James Franklin would get over that hump. Marcus Freeman would be regarded as one of the top 3, one of the top 4, 5 coaches in the entire country. Jeremiah Love, Abdul Carter, Xavier Watts, Tyler Warren, Jadarian Price, Katron Allen, Jack Kaiser, Nick Singleton, and so many more NFL talents will be on this field tonight. It's going to be awesome. Just take it in, enjoy this one, let these guys just do what they do, because, man, is it special what they do. It's going to be an awesome game, maybe a little bit monotonous at times, but that's that's old-fashioned football. You get after each other for 4 quarters, and whoever's standing up right at the end wins that game. But we'll move forward to that Texas-Ohio State game. This one will go a little bit quicker through, because I'm very much hoping that we'll have tomorrow to talk about this game just a little bit more. So we'll roll through this one just a little bit faster. But as we know, the matchups to watch, that back end against those Ohio State wide receivers is just as good as it gets. Todd McShay said it's the best matchup of the entire college football season. I'd have to agree with him. Those wide receivers against this back end, special in every sense of the word. You will see all NFL talents going at each other throughout that thing, and it's going to be good on good all night long. Who wins? It's going to be really hard to stop number 4, but at the end of the day, if anyone could, probably that Texas back end. And then the Ohio State pass rush against the Texas O-line. We talked about this one briefly, but it's at least 4 guys that are going to go in the top 2 rounds going at each other all night. JTT and Jack Sawyer against Kelvin Banks and Cameron Williams. It's going to be downright special to watch. And then just for fun, if Trevor Gooseby has to come in there at right tackle or left tackle, he's a future first rounder. He's played like that in the first couple of games, and man, that guy is very, very talented. So it's going to be awesome to watch this one unfold, and then you just add in all the other nightmares that this pass rush can give you for Ohio State. Man, it's going to be a really fun thing to watch, and that brings us to our last one. Steve Sarkisian against Jim Knowles will outright decide this game, because Steve Sarkisian, you got to coach the game of your life. You got to play around with a lot of different things. You got to do a lot of different things, and this defense is so fast, so mean, has so many athletes that if you don't create space with scheme, you're not going to create space, plain and simple. So it's going to be a true chess match. There's no doubt about that. I would argue that these are 2 of the top 5, 7 play callers in the entire country, regardless of the side of the ball, and I think they're going to get after each other pretty good on Friday. And then you got injury reports really good. All things considered, there were a couple of worries going into this game, but Ohio State, we've talked about the O-line injuries. We know that's going to be a factor. That's been a factor the last couple of games. Has not necessarily mattered the last couple of games, but not a ton to speak on there. They are locked in. They are ready to roll. Obviously, some things that could hamper them in terms of injuries that have already happened, but going into this game, they are as healthy as they were going into the Oregon game is probably the best way to put that. And then Texas, they had some questions, no doubt about that, but seems like no longer. Cam Williams, their right tackle, seems like he is all good, ready to roll. Definitely looked very explosive in practice. Isaiah Bond finally looks like Isaiah Bond again in practice, it seems. So definitely will be a huge thing. Texas, all good, all ready to roll, and definitely going to be a very fun one. I think all of us wanted all the talent in the world on that field, and that's exactly what we're getting. And then a little thing, the weather update doesn't seem like it's going to affect anything. The weather that's rolling through Dallas, I believe right now actually, doesn't feel like it's going to change anything. I don't expect any changes, but hopefully we'll have a show tomorrow. Hopefully if anything does change, we'll be able to update you on that when it does come. But going to be an awesome game. Weather hopefully will not be a factor, at least definitely won't be a factor for the players. Hopefully it's not a factor for the fans trying to get into that thing. Hopefully we have a packed crowd, and the hype for this game is very, very simple. Guys, the talent on that field is going to be different in every sense of the word. In my opinion, these are the two most talented rosters in college football right now. These are two teams that are going to go after each other in the first game of the season next year, so whoever loses this one is going to immediately turn their attention to Ohio State in the first game of next year's season. But the reality is Ohio State's looked like a buzzsaw. Texas has looked a little bit shaky at best. I don't know. I have a feeling about this game. I picked this game and I said 31-20 Ohio State, and I'm going to stick with that for the time being. I felt a little bit more comfortable doing that than what I was possibly going to do, but the reality is, I don't know. I'm getting a weird feeling about this one the same way I got a weird feeling about that Georgia-Ohio State game in Mercedes-Benz a couple of years ago. It's one team that was coming off a terrible loss. It was one team that was as on top of the world as you possibly could be. I don't know. They find a way back to the center, and I really do think it's going to be an absolute fight. I think there's going to be explosives in this one. I can't really describe why. I can't necessarily give you a good reason why, and I can't necessarily promise that. I just have a feeling about this one. I think it's going to be special, and I think you're going to see two quarterbacks that are playing as good of football as you've seen them play in their entire careers. But moving forward to a couple of best bets just to finish things off, getting a little bit crazy here. But Penn State, Notre Dame, I love the under here. I think they're going to be a fight for three quarters. A couple of big plays late will make the difference in this game. Going to be an awesome game to watch, and some defensive players that you're going to see play for a long time at the next level. And then I'm going to take the over in this one. This one I fought back and forth with a little bit. I love these defenses. I think they're playing great football. I just think these two offensive coaches are going to have great game plans. I think they're going to get after each other, and I really do think there will be a couple of big plays on both sides. Whoever wins it might just come down to the margins, might just come down to who makes that last play in the fourth quarter. So it's going to be awesome. These two games are absolutely incredible. Enjoy the one tonight. It's going to be so awesome to watch one of these coaches, one of these programs break through at a degree that they just haven't in a really long time. It's going to be awesome to watch this unfold, and definitely something I'm very much looking forward to. Cannot wait for tonight. Cannot wait for tomorrow. As for tomorrow, I don't know. As of right now, I have no idea what I'm going to wake up to tomorrow. I don't know if the snow is going to roll through and cut my power. I don't know if I'm going to have perfectly fine power. As of right now, I fully plan on being here at 9 a.m. Eastern, breaking down what we see tonight, breaking down what's next for those teams one way or the other, breaking down some questions for Texas, Ohio State, some coaching carousel stuff. We have a loaded show tomorrow. Don't you worry about that. If we get a show tomorrow, I will absolutely be here. You will know very, very early in the morning. I'll release a little bit of a short to let you guys know if we do have a show or if we don't, but I promise, if I can be here, I absolutely will be here. But we'll see you then. Thank you so much for tuning in to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all the social pages for all the content and updates you could possibly need. We have great people covering every single sport you could want. So if I'm not here tomorrow, then Jeremy will be here tomorrow. Then my guy Nelson will be here tomorrow at 12:30. So no worries, someone will be breaking down the Penn State game tomorrow on these networks. I'm very much hoping it's me at 9 a.m. Eastern, and if it is, I will see you then to break down everything of the craziness tonight. Enjoy it all, and I will see you here tomorrow. I very much hope I will see you here tomorrow. See you then.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.